I'm really excited to be here tonight. We're going to talk about the fall data that has come in, and also, put it into to larger context of our overall strategy to cultivate as much learning as possible, K-12, across our district. So let's start with the strategic plan and put this fall data in context of our larger strategic plan. As you've seen from previous meetings, we had two parts of our strategic plan, two strategies related to the data I'm going to share. First, we said that we were going to put into place a comprehensive, best-in-class assessment system. And the data that we're going to review today has come out of that assessment system. And that data also fuels a data-driven instructional approach. And we're also going to talk about both how we're using the data coming in from the diagnostics, but then also how we're going to use it throughout the first half of the year. And when I talk about the system, when I talk about our data, a comprehensive assessment system, there's three pieces that we're going to talk about tonight. The first is Acadience Learning, which we use in K2 for math and ELA. The second is Map Growth, which we use in grades 3 through 11 and with some 12th graders. And then finally, there's the PAIR assessment platform. And that one might be one that you're a little less familiar with, so I'll talk about that. When we're talking about Acadience and MAP, I want you to think of those as a ruler. As I know that we have a lot of parents on the call, and as you know, one of the traditions that a lot of families do is they have their kids stand up in the door jamb and they measure their height each year and mark it along the door jamb, right? And then over time, you get to see how your students grow, or your children grow over time. That's kind of what the Acadience and the MAP do. They help us understand our students' progress against national norms, and they help us measure both achievement, how tall the kid is in this analogy, but also growth, how much their achievement has changed from one year to the next. And so we give those assessments 3 times a year, and we do get that nationally normed, externally validated data. That said, we don't want to wait till the winter to know what our students are learning. So we also use formative assessments on the PAIR platform. And the PAIR platform is kind of like, it's an assessment platform. It's something that students can log on to take tests, and it gives teachers data about how students are doing. But it's different from Acadience and MAP in that we put in the assessments. And so we create our teachers get into committees and create the assessments together and make sure that they're accurate reflections of both our curriculum and the state standards. And then those assessments measure students' formative progress. And the analogy I want you to think about that is the scanner that you use when you go to the mechanic. Because when you go to the mechanic, you don't just want to know, is your car fixed or broken? You want to know what's broken, and you want to know what's working well. And when you plug in that scanner to the car, it'll tell you, oh, your engine's fine, but your transmission has something going on. And that's what these tests do for us. They'll tell us, oh, your student is doing well in multiplication, but they're struggling in fractions. And not only are they struggling in fractions, but they're struggling particularly when they're trying to convert from a mixed numeral to a improper fraction. And so that's really helpful this year. Or those assessments are really crucial to our overall strategy. And this year in particular, we're expanding their use. We used common assessments in grades 7 through 12 last year. We're expanding them down to grades 3 through 6. And that's really crucial to our strategy this year that I'm going to talk more about. All right, but in terms of data, today we're going to talk mostly about the data from the Acadience and the MAP platform. All right, let's start with K2 and let's unpack the data. And what we're going to do is we're going to look at last year's data, which was the first year that we used Acadience comprehensively, and then put the fall data in context of how we did last year. So this is our first slide. So I want to orient you first to what you're seeing. So the graph on the left is Acadience math data. We're looking just at kindergartners right now. And the colors represent the students that are, what the performance level is of the students. So the dark blue and the light blue, that is above benchmark and at benchmark. You can think of that as students that are on track. They have average performance. If they continue on their trajectory, they're going to read on grade level. They're going to be fluent readers. They're going to be able to comprehend text. They're going to be fluent mathematicians. And what you can see on this graph on the left is that between the fall, winter, and spring, we actually saw an increase. So a 10 percentage point increase in the percentage of students that are on grade level or at or above benchmark. At that same time, we saw a decrease in this dark gray. That means the students that are far behind and at risk of falling behind, we saw that reduction. That's a very good thing. Now here, this last bar is where we are in the fall. And you can see that this year, our kindergartners have a lower starting point than the kindergartners last year. And it's about a 4 percentage point difference. And that means that we need to be ready to provide extra resources to achieve the same outcomes, right? Because we have more ground to cover. And so we're already thinking of ways that we can support this increase in students well below basic to achieve this year. Moving over to reading, you can see that we had a similar increase. We went to 46% of students on grade level when they came to us to 55 by the end of the year. That's a good thing again, because it means more students are on track to be fluent readers. But an unfortunate reality that we're facing is that our new kindergartners are only 34% of them are coming to us on track. And that's a big reduction. You see, it went from 46% last year to 34% this year. So it means that we need to, in reading even more than math, we need to be identifying student needs and addressing those needs if we want to get to the same achievement that we saw last year. Now we're going to move on to first grade. So in first grade, we saw a similar trend. In math, we started the year at 41% at or above benchmark and moved up to 48, so a 7 percentage point increase. The starting point of our students this year is pretty similar to what we experienced last year. So 41% last year to 40% this year. Moving over to reading, you'll see that we went from 39% of students at or above benchmark to 47, so nice gain there. But we're starting this year a little bit behind where we did last year. Now, for my savvy consumers of data, you may be saying to yourselves, wait a second, I thought that our kindergartners ended the year at 51 and 55. How is it the case that we're starting at 40 and 33? It is an excellent question to ask, and I dug into it. And I found out that there's actually 2 causes to that I'll get into a little bit deeper in the coming slide. But it is true that we're seeing a decline across the summer, and we should pay attention to it and maybe take some action, and I'll talk about that action. Did I see somebody come off of mute? Was there a question that somebody had?
I guess that was me. I was thinking along the same terms you were thinking about, the kindergartens, and then you see the decline. So what is there trend to that?
Yeah. Just hold that thought for 2 slides and we'll get back and we'll talk about how that happened and what we can do about it.
Okay.
All right, let's round it out with second grade. So in second grade, we saw a different trend. So in second grade, we started the year at 32% of students at or above benchmark, and we ended at 30%. So it was pretty flat achievement. So we have some work to do in second grade, and we have to ask ourselves, why is it the case that we saw flat achievement and even a decline? Because you can see this dark gray actually got bigger, and that means there's more students at that high risk level than at the beginning of the year. So that's something we really got to address, and we're looking to reverse that trend this year. In terms of starting point, our second graders this year are starting in a pretty similar spot, just about 3 percentage points different between fall of last year and fall of this year. In reading, we also saw a decline, which is an area of concern for us that we would like to address. However, we also saw that these students, and this is the only K-2 grade level, this is the only subject and grade level where this happened. We actually saw we have a higher starting point of our incoming second graders this year. And so that, interestingly, that is the opposite trend also that we saw from kindergarten to first grade, because if you remember, in first grade, we ended the year at 47, and we actually came in at 56. And I have a hypothesis about this as well that we'll talk about in a second. So again, decline that we absolutely should address. Silver lining, we have a strong starting cohort in second grade in reading, which we really can leverage for higher achievement to set ourselves up for high third grade PSSA performance next school year. All right, I know there's a lot of text on this slide, but let me get into what my hypothesis is from the research I've done about why it is that we saw that decline. And first, I want to focus from that kindergarten to first grade shift. And what I found, so just in terms of the facts, what we saw is in ELA, 55% of students left kindergarten at benchmark, but only 33% of students entered first grade at or above benchmark, right? That's a drop of 22 percentage points. The drop in math was much smaller. It was only an 11-point drop. When I looked at who those kids were and I matched those kids up, what we found is that a little less than half of the drop can be attributed to summer slide. So that's a student that 31 students tested above benchmark in the spring and then ended up below or well below benchmark in the fall. And summer slide is a well-documented thing that happens. It actually happens at higher rates for students that have been traditionally underserved by public education, so students of color and students who are classified as economically disadvantaged. So it means that the one way to counter that is with summer enrichment. In math, however, so that was in reading, that about half the impact came from summer slide. In math, there was actually no discernible impact of summer slide. So for all the students we had 2 scores for, as many went up as went down. So we ended up pretty even in math in terms of summer slide. There's another cause though, and the other cause is new students. So we actually ended up having quite a few new students, so students that didn't have a spring score, but matriculated to us in first grade. And 80% of those students were well or were below or well below benchmark in ELA. And in math, almost all the decrease that we experienced can be attributed to those students coming to us. This comes to the hypothesis. I think it's reasonable to infer that these students may not have attended kindergarten because it's not required to attend kindergarten. And if they didn't, we might be able to counter this trend by recruiting more students to come to us for kindergarten. And so that's something to consider. To further do research on this, we could try to figure that out. We could do a survey of the parents who, the parents of the students who came to us below and ask them basically, did your student go to kindergarten? And if we confirm that finding, it would really encourage us to put some resources into upping our recruitment efforts. And I know we already recruit already. I'm not saying we don't just rest and not try, but it just might be something that we might need to try even harder at. I also mentioned at the top of the slide summer enrichment because we know that summer enrichment is important at stopping summer slide. And I also have a hypothesis that maybe it's the case that in that first grade to second grade transition, we did a really good job this year with reading instruction. And that's why we saw an increase in the students at benchmark in reading in first to second grade. That's also an answerable question, right? Because we can look and first match up. Are the kids that attended our summer enrichment program, did they do their test scores, their pre and post test scores in the summer enrichment match up? And we're looking to do some of that research between now and the next time we talk to you in November.
If I may ask,
oh, go ahead.
I'm sorry, I'm driving. So I love everything that the data is showing, but do you also think that perhaps maybe they did, like it's transiency, like maybe like they just moved to us and came from a less efficient district, right? Because you think they didn't go to kindergarten, but maybe they're just moving to us behind also.
Yeah. I mean, it absolutely could be that. And the only way to, I think, answer the question definitively would be to try to do a survey. You know, fortunately, we do know who those parents are and we do have their contact information. So if we have the resources to do so, and I'm not sure that we are, because I know that we're trying to do a lot, but if we can find the resources to do so, I think it would be a great idea to survey those parents to try to get an idea of that.
Well, we don't actually need to survey them because we have the information in our registration department.
Oh, that's interesting. I didn't think of that approach.
Right? Like we know who our first graders are that are new to our district.
For sure.
Right? And that's all collected electronically. So we should, without too much effort, be able to say, list me my, new to us first graders, and then match them to a score or something.
Yeah, Oh, no, I know that information. My question is, are they new to us because they didn't go to kindergarten, or are they new to us because they were at another district?
Right, but that would be in the registration information too.
Well,
Oh, okay, okay,
well,
yeah,
no.
that, yeah, yeah.
Hold, well, no. That so you're absolutely right. Like you would survey if they went to kindergarten, but then and with regard to finding out if they were a transient student, you would use the registration information. So it would have to be twofold on that
Got it, yeah, yeah.
because we wouldn't know just by looking at that and knowing that they went to kindergarten or not if we're only taking the first grade information.
Yeah, I'm taking a note on
your
that, yeah.
survey is correct. That would help identify if there is an issue due to the fact that they did not attend kindergarten.
And there is a state system too. I'm thinking now too, we could also go to the state information system, because if they were at another school, that would be marked in the state information system. So, we could look at our own registration information. We could look at the state system, which is called PIMS. And we could look at, and potentially if we still had gaps, then we could go to the survey to see if, to confirm if a student, because if a student went to a Catholic school, for instance, that wouldn't be in PIMS probably. And it might be in our registration packet, but I'm not totally sure. But I mean, the first place to check is the registration packet for sure.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you for that robust discussion there, and for the suggestion. I appreciate it. Let's shift gears now and look at our 3rd to 8th grade MAP data. This data is going to look a little bit different than it has in the past. So what we're looking at now, instead of looking at a percent of students at an achievement level, we're looking at a percent of students projected proficient on the PSSA. And the reason we can do that is because the MAP has an externally validated linking study. And so when a student takes the MAP, we know what achievement on the MAP correlates to success on the PSSA. Similarly to before, on the left, we see math, and on the right, we see ELA. I do want to apologize. Usually I don't like putting 2 graphs on the same slide that have 2 different scales, but these graphs do currently have 2 different scales. I'm going to fix that for the future, but for now, do take note that the scale on the left only goes to 20%, and the scale to the right only goes up to 50%. What we notice is a similar trend to what we saw in 2nd grade, that last year, unfortunately, we saw a decline in the percent of students projected proficient, a small decline, but a decline all the same, between the fall and the spring. And this is the opposite of what we want to see. We want to see students, as they stay with us, accelerating, not decelerating. Furthermore, it's also true that in the fall, there is a lower percentage of students projected proficient than there were in the fall last year, by about 2 percentage points. And so just like we talked about with K-2, we do need to provide even more support to our students in order to get back to the same place at the end of the year, because they're coming to us a little bit with their starting point of this 3rd to 8th grade cohort is a little bit lower. Moving over to ELA, we saw even a more stark decline, going from 46% in the fall to 34% at the end of the year. We also see that same trend where this year's cohort is about 6 percentage points lower than last year's cohort. And so this is something that both this trend and the fact that our students are coming to us lower is something that we really want to focus on this year. And the common assessments will support us in that, because we're absolutely not going to wait till December and January to check in on this, right? We're going to be checking in on those common assessments earlier to make sure that we're moving in the right direction. Right now, for this slide, I showed you 3rd through 8th grade all together. Let me take a second to talk about individual grade level performance. So what you see here is the gray bar for each grade level represents the performance of the same students the previous school year. So for example, this 20% of students in 4th grade in the fall were projected proficient on the PSSA. Those same kids back in the spring, there was more like 40% of them projected proficient. So we see this drop off from spring to fall. There's no gray bar for third grade because third graders were second graders last year and they took the Acadians. So we don't have MAP for them in the spring. But I can tell you that compared to last year's cohort was 36% proficient, and this year's cohort was 30% proficient. So they are starting at a weaker place relative to last year's cohort. I also have to point out something that comes about because of a quirk in the math PSSA in Pennsylvania. You'll notice that as grade level increases, projected proficiency decreases. Now, this could be alarming because you might say to yourself, oh, wow, this must mean that we are struggling to teach math, and the older kids get, the more and more we're struggling to teach math. That is not what this data is telling us. In Pennsylvania, as you go from grade to grade, you actually have to be higher performing relative to your peers in order to be proficient. So, for instance, in 8th grade, to be proficient, you need to be performing in the 80th percentile in MAP. So you need to be, in reference to the country, you need to be better than 80% of the students in the country in order to cross that proficiency threshold in 8th grade. So that stair step we see isn't necessarily say anything about our instruction. It's saying that the test is getting harder and harder, and we're struggling to keep up with the fact that the test is getting harder and harder. If you look at the state results, you'll see a similar stair-step pattern where as the grade levels go up, there's a lower percentage of students proficient. That also might be why we're seeing cohorts drop, because the 4th grade PSSA is a little bit harder than the 3rd grade PSSA, you see some of the drop. And we see that drop in 4th grade, in 6th grade, in 7th grade, and in 8th grade. We do not see it in 5th grade. So this is a good thing that we see this flat performance. You might be asking yourself, and I asked myself, so, the same question that we asked about Acadians. Why is it the case that we're seeing a decrease when we compare last year's fall to this year's fall? And I did a similar analysis and found similar trends, that it was a combination of summer slide, and in some grade levels, it was students coming to us below grade level, but that wasn't true in all grade levels. So in the secondary level, summer slide did have a bigger effect than we saw in the early grade levels. Doing the same thing, so now we're looking at the same data for ELA, and you can see that stair-step pattern has disappeared. And that's because that quirk that I talked about with the math PSSA does not exist with the ELA PSSA. It's pretty, you have to perform the same at the same place relative to your peers in order to demonstrate proficiency. So we do see more of a steady, you don't see that stair-step pattern. It is also true that most students had better fall performance, or most cohorts, I should say, had better fall performance than they did the previous year. That is not true for our 3rd grade cohort, though. When we compare this year's 3rd grade cohort to the 3rd grade cohort from last year, it went from 49% to 42%. All right, let's shift now. Let's close it out with 9 through 11. And before, well, actually, you know what? Let me pause here. Did anybody have any questions about the 3rd through 8th grade data before I move on to 9 through 12? Okay, let's keep going then, and then we'll have an opportunity for questions at the end. Before I get into the 9th grade data, I want to tell you a little bit about some research that we did over the summer, and how it's impacting how our assessment strategy for grades 9 through 12. So I mentioned that PSSA has an externally validated linking study that tells us what performance on the PSSA, or what performance on the MAP equates to similar performance on the PSSA, or proficiency on the PSSA. That study does not exist for Keystone, but we did perform an internal study, and it was encouraging. What it found was that for both Keystone and for biology, there was a strong correlation of the scores on MAP and the scores on Keystone. And we found that if students are achieving at about the 60th percentile or above on the MAP, they are likely to be proficient on the PSSA, or not on the PSSA, forgive me, on the Keystone. So we feel confident that our strategy for Keystone Literature and for Keystone Biology is correct, using the MAP to help predict performance there. It's the right strategy. One of the things that makes that biology strategy work is that there is a MAP life sciences test. And so the MAP life sciences test really focuses on the same kind of content that's on the biology. In algebra, we saw there was a weaker correlation between the MAP performance and the Keystone performance. And we recognized that we actually were not giving the algebra MAP. We were giving the general MAP test. And there's reasons to do that. In that it measures a larger variety of content, but it does make it difficult to, it does not help us understand how students are going to end up performing on the Algebra 1 Keystone. So we decided this year to shift from the general math assessment that MAP provides to the Algebra 1 test. And that has two benefits. One immediate benefit is it gives us more relevant data to use to guide our instruction early in the year this year. And I'm going to show you an example of that in a slide. But the second thing that it does, we're hoping it's going to be a better predictor of Keystone performance so that we have a better idea of where our instruction is working for kids and where it is not. Just like we have in 3 through 8, and just like we have with Keystone Literature and Keystone Biology. So here is our 9 through 11 Algebra 1 MAP data. And so now we're looking at, we're back to looking at achievement levels, but instead of looking at or above benchmark, we're looking at quintiles. And quintiles just means we split 99 points of a percentile rank into 5 groups. The red represents 1 through 20. The orange is the 21st through the 40th. Yellow is the 40th through the 60th. This can be think about the average group. So the yellow students are students that are about average. The green is above average, and the blue is well above average. And if you remember what I shared on the last slide, it's the students in the green and the blue that are likely to be end up proficient on the Keystone. Now, we don't have a linking study for the Algebra 1 test, nor do we have internal research, because this is the first time we're doing it. But because that's how it works out with the biology and the literature, that's going to be our working assumption this year. And already we can see that the performance is matching up more with what we would expect. Because last year, we had about 10% of students proficient on the Algebra Keystone in 9th grade. And this is showing that we're projected at about 17, which isn't matching up exactly, but it's much closer than what we were expecting in previous years. So we already feel better about this strategy. And now we know the students that are on track or within reach of proficiency, and the students that are more farther away, that are starting the year farther away. This slide just breaks it down. So now we're looking at a single class. So a single class of college prep algebra at the Penwood 9th grade academy. And this is what I was telling you about instructionally relevant information. So this teacher of this class can now see their students' relative strength and relative areas of weakness. So they know coming in that their students are weakest when it comes to, well, there's 2 ways to look at this. In terms of percent of students projected proficient, the biggest weakness is computation and estimation with real numbers. In terms of the median achievement, so the average, the biggest weakness would be number sense patterns, functions, and graphing. And what we can do is we have this data not just for all students, but for individual kids. And so we can use this data for individual students to help craft our instruction and know where to spend a little bit more time in the year and a little bit less time during the year. Here is the same data for ELA. Now we've jumped back from the instructionally relevant data to the overall aggregate. And so we can see that this is, and as a reminder, it's the students in the green and the blue that are starting the year on track to proficiency. And it's these students in yellow that are within reach of proficiency if we provide them with extra support. So I think the big question next is, where do we go from here? How do we, I talked about how important it is in second grade and in third through eighth grade to turn that trend around and turn that downward stair step into an upward stair step. Well, this is how we're going to do it. So it starts with student-centered goal setting. And I'll talk a little bit more about what that means. But it starts about I'll say now that it starts with having a goal for each and every kid in our building, knowing their baseline and knowing how much growth is needed for that student. Then we bring in those common assessments, because once we know students' baseline, we know how they should achieve on those common assessments. And if they don't achieve in the way they should, we know that we need to act, and we need to act early. And that's where the data-driven methodology comes in. This data-driven methodology is actually not the first year we implemented it, right? We actually started implementing it earlier in the strategic plan, so we're already have some strength. And now we're just going to enhance it by giving those common assessments consistently and using the PAIR platform in grades 3 to 6. I want to talk a little bit about the research base for student-centered coaching, because the research base is large. And what it says is that when you set goals with students that are meaningful, it increases students' sense of self-efficacy. And we're not just talking about the students that are close to proficiency, we're talking about all students, because these both MAP and Acadians give us the national norms. So they tell us how much a student, regardless of their starting point, on average will grow during the year. And they also tell us how far that student is from the grade level bar. Just like, remember back to the student standing in the door jam, and us measuring their growth every year. So we can talk to students about that, both how much they should grow and then where they are relative to the grade level bar. And then when we take that test in the winter, we can talk to them again about, are they progressing as they want to? And they can even set goals for themselves and say, okay, I know this is average growth, but I want to go more. And there's even a place in the MAP platform to record that student-centered goal. So that's like talking to students about it, right? So that's why it's good to talk to students about it. But we also, the goal setting approach has real benefit for the staff, because what we can do is we know, because we know how much each student should grow, every time we give that common assessment, it's a chance for us to go back and see, well, are they making the progress we expect? And if not, how do we respond early? And so it helps us operationalize our vision, right? Because our vision says we will nurture and empower all students. And so by setting a goal for all students and pursuing that goal for all students with every single common assessment, we're really operationalize the vision we have for kids. And this is what it looks like. This is kind of like the brass tacks. And you don't need to know everything on this, but know that every school had a goal setting tool that combined the students' PSSA or Keystone performance, their spring MAP performance, and their fall MAP performance. And they know, is the student maintaining or declining? And how far is that student from the grade level bar? And they use that information to set a goal status for every student. Is this a student that's already proficient and I'm going to keep them there? Is this a student that is basic, but I want to move them to proficient? Is this student that is in basic now, but is probably going to stay in basic because they have a lot to grow? But we're going to grow them 6 points this year, and then next year, they're going to be that basic to proficient. And then, of course, there's also students that are very far behind that we can't get to proficient this year, maybe even next year, but we're going to make a big chunk of movement this year, a big chunk of movement next year, and then 3 years from now, get them to proficient. So we're putting every student on a track to proficiency and monitoring that progress. And the data-driven methodology, so that's the beginning of the year, right? Know where every kid is. And every school has done this. Every school knows where every single one of their students is and knows the aggregate goal that it rolls up to. And now it's time to see it, name it, do it. Just like Ed talked about during this presentation last year. We're going to look on the common assessment. We're going to see what the misconceptions are. Remember back to that auto mechanic with the diagnostic tool. We're going to see what's not working. We're going to tell the students what is working and what's not. The teachers are going to know, the parents are going to know, and then we're going to do it. We're going to change, we're going to help that student address that misconception and get stronger. All right, so that is my presentation. Leah, let's stop for questions.
Any board of directors at this time have any questions for Mr. MacArthur? Anyone from the floor? So first, I would like to say, Mr. MacArthur, this data is very good. I really appreciate you breaking down the assessments and utilizing the tools to find the need. And that's what I see that what we're doing. I like how you also discuss summer enrichment, is important. As I noticed though, I had two questions. Like, what are we, after we identify with these assessments, what other things do we have in place, like to ensure, like we talk about doing a survey for the parents, right? But also, like, do teachers assign reading anymore? Like, just me being a new educator, I'm new, so correct me if you hear anything wrong, but what I'm noticing is that, for instance, when in my class I had started assigning reading, and the other teachers were like, what? That's like a thing of the past. No one assigns reading anymore. And so what I started doing was getting my kids to read in class. But also when we talk about summer enrichment, the thing is that how much reading are we doing in class and assigning it for them to do at home? So because I just find that we don't assign reading anymore. So
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And I think that the perception may come, like, we talk a lot in reading about close reading and about, reading the text multiple times. And I think there is a lot of, there's a lot of modeling we do in the modern reading curriculum where we're showing students, like, demonstrating in real time and practicing with them how to read rich text and break it down. And I think that means that in class, I think if you go to a modern ELA classroom, you will see a lot of like collaborative reading in a way that might feel like students are not reading independently as much. But you are absolutely right that eyes on text time, the amount of time that students are reading and independent reading time is incredibly important. And it is something that we do and that we care about. And I think one of the ways that it connects to what we were talking about is one of the strategies that a student can write down when they set that more ambitious reading goal for themselves is, I'm going to read at home, 15 minutes, 20 minutes every night. And I'm gonna, and it doesn't even need to be like, it can be classwork, but it can also be, we also want our students reading for pleasure because we know that, once you get bitten by that reading bug, kids take off, like the Harry Potter effect. And so, yes, I would say we do assign reading and we do encourage reading at home for sure. But it's also true that we really emphasize the collaborative reading strategies, that close reading, and that it's called not joint. Tyra, do you remember what it's called when you read together in
Shared reading.
Shared reading, yes. Oh, Octavia, you're on the call. I didn't know you're on the call, Octavia. Yeah, shared reading. Thank you. Oh, if I would have known you're on the call, Octavia, I would have let you take the question.
Yeah, I was
Go ahead.
going.
Add
Yeah.
anything, please.
No, well, I will add a little that we also have something that's called Newsella, which is one of our supplemental resources that truly allows us to share reading on students' independent and instructional levels. So it's a digital resource that has numerous articles about current events and historical and everything in between. So definitely everything that Mr. MacArthur added about what we have for reading, we definitely encourage students to do reading outside of school, but we also understand, depending on that age and circumstances of what's happening outside of school, we're limited with what we can expect from students once they are leaving our school buildings. In the earlier years, we definitely encourage, a lot of teachers will even put on their, homework sheets, 20 minutes of reading outside of school, because we know the importance of, like what Mike said, that getting bitten by that reading bug, because one time you're going to read something like, oh my gosh, this is so exciting. So we try to definitely encourage that over and over through grades K through 12. And welcome to that education world.
Thank you. Thank you. Definitely. I get to see the whole other side now of things. It's interesting. But yes, so that was the only questions I had. Does anyone have any other questions? All right, hearing or seeing none. Thank you very much, Mr. McArthur.
Yeah,
For this.
Monique, I just want to say one last thing before
Yeah.
I end. Because I want to end on a very positive note. So we were analyzing. We just started giving our second set of common assessments, and we were sitting down today and analyzing them. And in quite a few grade levels, often you give the first assessment, especially in math, like mid-unit, and then the second assessment towards the end of the unit. And in many grade levels, we saw increases in the standard performance between the first test and the second test. And so I just want to end just by saying, like, we're starting to see some positive trends in the standards, and we're really doubling down on this strategy to make sure that that short cycle of seeing that change and seeing those misconceptions and addressing them quickly. And so I'm hopeful that that is going to gain traction and continue to reap dividends for all of our students.
I do have one question. I'm sorry I took so long.
Yes.
Do we see, I know that the state testing system has gone to all laptops, correct?
Yes.
So do we see any problems with our students not having access or the keyboarding skills that those tests demand in the lower grades to have any negative effects for our students? And if we did, how would we work around it?
Yeah, actually, that's a great question, because I didn't explicitly say this, but I should. So one thing we actually this year will be the last year that the PSSA will be on paper for any grade level. So we've already started to move to digital, and the state has affirmed that they will be 100% digital, but we're not totally there yet. So if you're asking, like, is the state 100% digital now? The answer is not yet, but we are going to 100% digital. And that's actually one of the reasons why we emphasize PAIR this year, because PAIR will be online. So giving those students, we're moving towards, between Google Classroom and PAIR, we're giving students more and more at-bats at typing their answers and entering their answers, even in math, on the computer. And that means we have to be really diligent about students having the ability to enter their answers on the computer, but often also have a piece of paper, right? Because we know in math and in ELA, you need your scratch pad and you need to enter your answers, your final answers. So that is the other reason why we're using PAIR, is because PAIR is a digital platform that resembles the PSSA online experience. And so kids will get 10 at-bats at taking, well, actually more like 12 at-bats, because 10 at-bats with PAIR and then 3 at-bats in MAP prior to the PSSA. So we are, our strategy does take into account the fact that we're moving 100% digital.
So, but when are those at-bats? Because I just think our as with economically disadvantaged, they have less access to keyboarding and laptops. Like, when are those at-bats? Are those in third grade? Are they in first grade, second grade? Like, how can we get them as many shots at it to make sure that one of the barriers isn't the mechanism they're using to take the test?
Yes, absolutely. Yes, starting in third grade. That's right. Starting in third grade, with starting in third grade, all students' tests are digital. Will be digital
right.
going forward. Yeah. So
right,
yeah. Go ahead.
Is, how do I get them on that keyboard taking pseudo tests in first grade and second grade? Because I don't even think it's educationally appropriate for a child to have to track, on a laptop, that sort of thing. But the state's here, and that's who's doing it. But how do we get them at bats in first and second grade so that isn't even an issue in third grade?
Well, I could begin to answer that for you, Jennifer. Just if we remind ourselves that we're technically a one-to-one district. All of our children have exposure to laptops or Chromebooks. Some schools have iPads, and we're beginning to have our students use them as early as kindergarten. So I think because we're exposing our children to those devices earlier and sooner, I think our children are becoming adequately prepared. Remember, a lot of our students do get access to cell phones, right? And on those cell phones, they play games. Those
Right.
games give you hand and eye coordination that begins to build those skill sets to maneuver around. So I think sometimes we're afraid of the technology and then how do our children perform on that technology? But our children perform with that technology as soon as they get exposed to it. So we had that conversation in some of our primary classes and sources when we began to discuss what will a classroom look like one-to-one. Meaning will that technology be in their hands? Our children also have intervention systems where they have those platforms that are for math, for Dreambox, for Lexia. So our students are exposed to those things from K through 6. So our students are getting that exposure. Teachers are beginning to break down and allow students to really begin to communicate and or respond with that technology. I think once the adults become unscared of technology, students will also be able to help themselves in the classroom. We cannot change what the state is asking us to do to move forward to the
Right.
platform. I think the state has given us a few years to do the preparation. And that's why we too move towards the MAP platform, which is actually digital as well for 3 through 11, because our students weren't doing all of their assessments on the digital platform. So we've done that, began to move that shift and that needle. I think more practice will help us get there. The depth of knowledge and understanding for students using those devices will help us do that too. I think time and patience, but I think we have the exposure because we're the one-to-one district already. I think we're moving in the right direction. Mr. MacArthur, if you could end your share.
Ms. Brown, I completely agree. I just don't know in K1 and 2, and I'd be interested to find out how much one-to-one time they actually get on computers, right? Because I know, right, a lot of them aren't taking them home for whatever reasons, no judgment implied. But I would be interested to know in K1 and 2 how much they actually use the computer in the classroom.
And we encourage that beyond the station rotation, I guess that's what teachers still call it, or small group instruction, when students are being exposed to that. So we can come back to find out what does that really look like in our schools. That can be something that we begin to measure for the purpose of K-2 to better answer the question. But we do from central office encourage all learners to be on the digital platform at least 30 to 40 minutes per day. Some content, specifically math and ELA, they are on the computer for at least 15 to 20 minutes per instructional block.
Thank you.
Yep, no, thank you for the question. Chair President, Madam President, I believe we are finished with our questions for the evening.
All right, thank you, everyone. Thank you, Mr. MacArthur, and thank you all admin and board of directors that have joined this meeting. Everyone have an awesome night. This meeting is adjourned.